Colleagues, good afternoon. It is 14 hours. My name is Nnaki Nemadodzi, and I'd like to request that we wait for a couple of minutes, perhaps 5 minutes or so, as we admit the members who are joining. Colleagues, good afternoon again. I can see our guest is now here. Dr. Genevieve, are you okay? Can we start?
Yes, ma'am, we're good to go.
Good to go, thanks. Colleagues, good afternoon again. I would like to take this opportunity to start the session by introducing myself. My name is Nnaki Nemadodzi. I'm the Director of Community Engagement, and I will not be wasting any further ado. I can see my DVC Research and Postgraduate Studies Professor Feza is already here, and I'm aware that she has a hectic schedule. She may not be able to stay with us for longer, and therefore I would request that I do give this opening remarks to her to do that, knowing that she may have to leave at some point. But colleagues, this is the session as stated, and it will not be long. The program is really about Dr. Genevieve delivering the public lecture, followed by interactive sessions and some response from colleagues. I also wish to acknowledge that our DVC Corporate Affairs is also here with us, Dr. Martin. So I will therefore take this opportunity to invite Professor Feza, our DVC Research and Postgraduate Studies, to welcome us to this session. Thank you, Professor Feza.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Prof Netshandama. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Dr. Genevieve. Good afternoon, Dr. Martins. Good afternoon to all the professors and my colleagues that are in the session. As you can hear, my voice is horrible. I'm quite sick. I would like then to welcome everybody to this session and also appreciate Dr. Genevieve for giving us this opportunity to listen and hear her lens in terms of engaged scholarship, because we all have different lenses in how we look at things, but we all have a common goal. And we therefore appreciate to have her coming here and address us. And I'm hoping that we will be able to engage with what she's going to share us, as it is going to take us further in our own agenda as the University of Venda, because we see ourselves leading in engaged scholarship. We also have quite a number of projects that we have that are indicating what we aspire as also as want to take us further. Therefore, I'm not going to waste any time, colleagues, but I am welcoming you and welcoming our guest speaker and thanking Prof Netshandama for organizing this session. Thank you very much, colleagues. Enjoy and listen and engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Feza. Speedy recovery. Thank you for affording our session these blessings. Colleagues, without any further ado, I would then, if Dr. Genevieve, I could see you are set. I would therefore ask that I do not actually read your long resume because I do know that as we talked, your presentation will also be in a way talking about yourselves, and I certainly going to be an inspiration for all of us. So if you are okay, Dr. Genevieve, may you take the podium. Thanks. I think you are muted.
As they say, it is the most frequently said word of this year: unmute yourself. So thank you so much, Professor Bowani. We really, Bonani, we really appreciate the welcome, and we appreciate the warm welcome of the college leadership, the university's leadership. And so we're going to get straight into it. Today, we would like to look at what does it take to make an engaged university? What is the thinking? What is the action required? How do we shape our thinking around our practice and presence in the world as engaged universities. So I'm going to go straight into the presentation without taking up any more time. So colleagues, you know, we need to take a step back before we talk about engaged universities and engaged scholarship. For us, we are dealing with a very lamentable situation. Moletsi Mbeki, in the book Architects of Poverty, describes the situation on the continent as follows. He says, half a century after liberation from colonization, Africa has dropped so far down the development scale that experts refer to Africans as mankind's, and that's seen in context, bottom billion, who can only come out of the black hole they have dug for themselves through intervention by the rest of the world. Now, when I read this quote, the first thing it makes me feel is anger. Why are we being described as this? Why are these so-called experts referring to the continent of Africa as the world's bottom billion? Now, we know that Africa has a population of just over 1 billion, and if Africa had to ever become one country, which it is not, we would be the 3rd largest after China and India. So as the people of Africa, we comprise of over 1 billion people. But why are we being relegated to being seen as the world's bottom billion? I have serious problems with the way we're being described here. And sadly, when people think about our continent, they either think about our wildlife, or they think about all of these things we see on the map here. You know, the disease, the genocide, the child soldiers, you know, the dictatorships, the riots. But while they were busy describing ourselves in such harsh terms, we are seeing all around the world great dysfunctions taking place, great disorientation, especially now in the recent times. So what do we do to break free from this perception that people have of us, this abiding Afro-pessimism? What do we do to position ourselves as strong and confident thinkers, as strong and confident intellectuals who are no longer under the perpetual mentorship of the West or the Northern hegemonies? We are no longer perpetually being tutored by the rest of the world, but we can find our own voice through our scholarship and through our development theorizations and praxis. And so we can turn this image of us around, and we can do this and bring about the African Renaissance through our engaged scholarship efforts. So throughout this presentation, we will be looking at how the university is that critical asset in actually bringing about the African Renaissance, in supporting the vision of Africa rising, and Africa rising, and Africa where there is shared growth, where there is social justice, and where there is moving from disorientation to a reorientation in terms of our politics, our economics, in terms of our social justice, and so on. So we as the university, the universities of South Africa and the universities of the African continent play a large role in dispelling this very perturbing description of us. In fact, at the very first African Higher Education Summit on revitalizing higher education for Africa's future, the summit declared that African universities shall commit ourselves to the pursuit of excellence in teaching, learning, research, and scholarship, public service, and the provision of solutions to the development challenges and opportunities facing African people across the continent. So, why must we become engaged universities? Firstly, we have this great world of disorientation, and we have COVID, which has deepened development challenges. But even before COVID, we had the global economic crisis of 2008. And even then, universities around the world were saying that society is expecting more of them. Society began to scream out loud to say that the funds that we have invested in higher education, we are not seeing the return on that investment. Yes, you produce graduates, but we are not seeing the impact on our policies, on our development challenges. We are not seeing improvements. We are not seeing science that meets society's needs. We need to, if we are taking resources from the public purse, ensure that university science meets the society's needs that funds it. And so universities around the world began to lobby together and began to discuss about how we can become more engaged. And so there were global movements to talk about engaged universities and to talk about what it means to be more entrenched in society, not have these thick dividing walls separating us from the society that we serve. Very often our universities are placed in contexts, but the contexts that surround us never ever get to feel and enjoy the development outcomes of our presence. And so universities around the world began to express a commitment, a renewed commitment to civic engagement and refine their mission for greater social relevance. In fact, Hoyt and Hollister actually say that the engaged university is the preferred model, even the gold standard. So we celebrate the University of Venda in making its mission intrinsically tied to the notion of engaged scholarship and realizing its benefits for province building as well as nation building and sustainable development, and the supporting the development goals of the continent. So if we had to look at the white paper in post-school education and training, the white paper of 2013, we are seeing there's some very worrying red flags emerging. The white paper states that the education and training system must find ways to cater for the needs of millions of adults and young people who are unemployed, poorly educated, and not studying. Now, this category is referred to as the NEETs, not in employment, not in education or training, NEETs. And it's a global concept being used for the category of young people who find themselves not in unemployed and sometimes chronically unemployed, not in any training, education or training initiatives. And so the white paper is highlighting this as a red flag. Further to this, the white paper has identified that communities have learning needs which are not being catered for by public education and training institutions. And so it is calling on us as universities, calling on us as the post-school education and training sector to become aware, to become sensitized, to open up our eyes and see with new eyes the needs of our society. In addition to this, the white paper states that education opportunities that are available are insufficient and are of a generally poor quality. Now, we really, really need to look at all three of these red flags and be able to understand that our impulse for becoming engaged universities is rooted in very key strategic documents in our country. And these needs have been identified in these key documents, such as the white paper. So, moving on to what is the engaged university? The engaged university actively, this is not something that just happens by the way, it actively develops strong relationships with communities. And our communities, by the way, are not just communities in specific physical areas. Our communities are communities in all settlement types, from the rural farmstead to the town, from the rural farmstead to the village, to the town, to the city, all the way up to the megalopolis. And so we are at ease to function across all settlement types. Our communities also involve government, business, civil society. And so we are always interacting across these spheres. And so we work with communities in a close and robust relationship. We bring our intellectual resources, our skills, and our talents, and we set it in the direction of the needs of the world in order for us to improve development outcomes, while at the same time, we're enhancing and advancing a scholarship which is relevant, which is integrated, a scholarship which is caring, a scholarship which is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. Remember, the engaged scholarship is a means to an end, the end being transformation of people, places, policies, processes, learning products, products that will be needed for the knowledge society and for the fourth industrial revolution, which we find ourselves in. And so, according to the Association of Commonwealth Universities, engagement, this term, now some people worry about this term because it almost has militaristic undertones, but we must not see it in that way. And we must not advance into communities as empire builders. Our motivation is for the merit and the benefit of life, for the merit and benefit of sustainable development and nation building, social justice, and social cohesion. So this engagement implies strenuous, thoughtful interaction across disciplines. It is not something that we give minimal thinking to in our strategy, in our mission and vision. It is something which is very, very clear. It is highlighted. It is something that runs as a transversal theme across all that we do as the engaged university. It sets the university's aims and purposes and priorities in the world. It relates teaching and learning and research to the wider world. We don't want a disengaged, disconnected, dispassionate scholarship. It also enables us to remain in dialogue with our critical interlocutors, our networks and partners. And it also enables us to have dialogue between our engaged researchers and practitioners, whether they be in government, business, civil society, and so on. We also, as universities, don't walk around with our blinkers. We understand that we operate as citizens of the world, and as such, we contribute to the wider responsibilities as being citizens. Now, what gives us the impulse? Which documents do we draw our insight from to develop the engaged university in the South African context? Firstly, we have the Higher Education Act. Remember, this act was the post-apartheid reconstruction of the Higher Education Act. And this post-apartheid reconstruction of the Higher Education Act saw to it that community engagement is a critical aspect of the university's core business. It was not supposed to be corporate social investment, but it's supposed to have been the university's applying deep, rigorous thinking to its practice and presence in the world in order for the university to serve as a chief asset in development, together with government, business, civil society, and communities across all settlement types. And so our Higher Education Act is a critical route from which we draw our inspiration. I've just discussed with you the white paper in post-school education and training. Also, you would need to look at your university strategic plan, because from the strategic plan comes the impulse for the university to carry out its engaged scholarship efforts. You would also have to look at your teaching, learning, and research as well as your lifelong learning, that's your short learning programs, your e-learning aspects and ICTs, your performance and promotion policies, to see whether they are all in sync and cohered with the vision of the engaged university. Whether across all these documents, from the university strategy to the policies, we see that there is a consistent message of the university being an engaged university. We have engaged faculties, we have engaged scholars. So you would also need to look at our teaching and learning plans, our research plans. These things cannot happen in silos. We would have to run this theme of our identity, who we are, and our practice and presence in our world through all of these strategic documents. And then we also have key development documents outlining where the great development challenges lie in the country, on the continent, and around the world. You have the National Development Plan for South Africa, and I can tell you now, the timelines of the National Development Plan have been just, shot down after COVID. Development challenges that are listed in the National Development Plan have now deepened due to COVID and are seemingly intractable with all the challenges that we face. But through collaborative thinking, collaborative ideation, collaborative theory making, we can reach a place where we can provide rich solutions for the problems of development in our country, as well as the goals of the African continent, as we see in the Agenda 2063, which sets the aspirations and the goals and targets for development on the continent, and the Sustainable Development Goals. The interesting thing, colleagues, about the Sustainable Development Goals is Goal 17. Goal 17 is that we can only achieve all the other 16 goals if we are in collaboration and we form robust networks and partnerships. And so these are the guiding documents that we have in the country, within our universities, and in the national, continental, and development landscape that we draw our impulse from. Now, how does engaged scholarship benefit the academy? How does it transform us as academics, our processes, our structures, how we spend our money, to what we commit resources to, and our priorities? Firstly, we need to remember that we cannot go on with a kind of disconnected scholarship, a scholarship which is not in connection with what we say and what we think. Very often we think one thing, so we have a certain consciousness, but we say something else, and that discourse is not connected to our consciousness, and we do something completely different. So our action is not connected to our discourse and consciousness. In engaged scholarship, this is an integrating scholarship. It ensures that what the university says about itself, all the great statements about its mission and its strategy and its vision and all of those things, are connected with the consciousness of the university, top of the mind consciousness across all sectors of the university, as well as top of the mind consciousness and discourse in the actions that we take. So we are always looking to integrate our discourse, consciousness, and action, so there is clear alignment across all. For us, we see the engaged university as operating in an open space. By this, let's look at what does it mean to be a closed university. The closed university is, you can see these lines here. You can see these hard, rigid lines separating faculties and disciplines. In the closed university, we are not talking to each other. Not even disciplines are talking to each other. In the closed universities, faculties don't talk to each other. In the closed university, there is a silo-based action and thinking. There is knowledge hoarding instead of knowledge sharing. And then we've moved to a more collaboration kind of university. And in the collaborative university, we see those hard lines between the faculty and between the disciplines being broken. And this is where we are seeing the rise in the emphasis on multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity. Multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity is needed for engaged scholarship. It enables us to see the bigger picture. It enables us to understand that no one discipline or one faculty can solve the development challenges of our world. But through rich, shared, and mutual and interactive learning within the university, we can enrich our perspectives, our theory, and our insights through multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity. So the engaged university, firstly, is engaged on the inside. And then as we move to the final circle, we see that the engaged university is an open university. This university, look at the inside of the circle. We are no longer seeing those dividing walls between the disciplines and the faculties. Now our disciplines and faculties are free to work with each other. There is a shared purpose. There is joint action. There's not this competitive process where we want to outdo each other. We are moving to the understanding of the merits of collaboration as strengthening and enriching our academic praxis. And so in the engaged university, you'll notice that we no longer have the hard lines around the circle. Now the university silos are broken, and now we are seeing that there is engagement outside of the university with government, business, civil society, and communities in physical spaces, our communities across rural and urban settlements. So here we are talking on the inside, we are in dialogue on the outside, and we are freely sharing and mobilizing knowledge from the communities to the university to enrich curricula, to ensure that the curricula that we produce and the research that we produce is relevant, as well as has its eyes on the horizon and is a futures thinking process that's in place, where we are looking at the game changers and the disruptors that are on the horizon. But we do this in dialogue with our networks, stakeholders, and partners outside the university. And this brings us to the engaged university model. It is a connected university, both internally and externally. There's a rich and vibrant ecosystem of mutual and beneficial knowledge sharing and knowledge mobilization, with the end being transformation, not the end being just the production of scholarship. So now, as we look further, we know a widely used scholar on the issue of engaged scholarship is Boyer. And Boyer is making it very, very clear that engaged scholarship differs from the scholarship of discovery because it has direct application to broader public issues. Engaged scholarship is not just a scholarship for collaboration's sake. It is scholarship that is integrated, that is collaborative, but it leads to outcomes that impact on society for the merit and benefit of life. And so
Prof.
The mic is muted.
James, you're muted.
Dr. James?
hi,
Yes,
have I been muted all this time?
No.
No.
Okay, just now. So do I need to go back a little, or?
Just here.
Okay, great. So the way I think about engaged scholarship and for us to deepen impact is to make sure we are mobilizing knowledge. Tragically, in the past, universities around the world used to see itself in terms of this one-way knowledge mobilization. University knowledge moving in the direction of the communities. Communities were seen as blank slates. Communities were seen as being needing the university's instruction and needing the university to teach it. And so we saw knowledge mobilization as unidirectional. But for impact for our engaged scholarship efforts, we need to see knowledge mobilization as two-way knowledge mobilization that enriches both the academy and the community. So in a two-way knowledge mobilization process, academic knowledge will move in the direction of communities and community knowledge will move in the direction of the academy. When academic knowledge is augmented by the knowledge systems of communities and the insight and the understanding, the experience, the case studies, it will enrich scholarship in a way that we have never imagined. And when the insight developed within the university is mobilized in the direction of communities, we see strengthened agency. So two-way knowledge mobilization is what is how we will deepen engaged scholarship impact and will ensure that there is excuse me, colleagues, there was a sneeze that was a long time coming. Thank you. And so we see both sectors being the agency being deepened and enhanced through this mutual and reciprocal knowledge mobilization. And so in setting up our structures as engaged universities, we need to ask, what do we do to facilitate this free movement between the university and communities and between the communities and universities? Now, to drive all of this, we need a cohort of engaged scholars. What would be the characteristics of these engaged scholars? Let's have a look at a few characteristics. Firstly, our engaged scholars collaborate with communities outside the academy for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in the context of partnership and reciprocity. Our engaged scholars understand the value of partnerships. They understand the value of knowledge outside of the university. They do not treat this knowledge as being substandard or alien or not fit to be called knowledge. They respect cognitive justice and apply it to their work in engaged scholarship. In fact, our engaged scholars encourage the participation of non-academics in ways that broaden and enhance engagement and deliberation about social issues inside and outside the university. There is a wealth of knowledge to be gained from our interactions across the ivory towers. And so engaged scholars know this, and they are the first to appreciate this, prioritize this, and live this in their practice and presence. Further to this, engaged scholars have an acute understanding of the global and the local. They understand that what may happen in China tomorrow morning will have a ripple effect on our continent. What may happen in the Solomon Islands may have a ripple effect on the global community. They understand the global in the local and the local in the global. Our engaged scholars have very specific thinking skills. For one, they are creative thinkers. They can think outside of the norms and the boxes of orthodoxy. And they can also innovate. They can look at systems, processes, and products and think of it afresh and anew. They also think about thinking. they do not just treat thinking as something that just happens. They are very intentional to think about the quality of thinking, the thinking strategies, the thinking styles, the thinking skills that are required to become an engaged scholar. They are also able to describe, understand, and reflect critically on social problems in dialogue with communities. Now, in scholarship, we describe before we go about prescribing. We always learn through qualitative analysis that we need to have the skill to describe in rich detail, and our engaged scholars have that skill. They are able to really offer very, very deep descriptions because they are also informed by new understanding coming from their community dialogue partners. They can also harness research to respond to community needs. They can mobilize the research output. I mean, normally we produce the research output, it gets published in an accredited journal, and that's where its graveyard is. But our engaged scholars know how to mobilize this research and how to get it translated into various languages, how to make it relevant and user-friendly, how to turn it into policy sheets, how to turn it into seminars and dialogues, how to turn it into a radio feature or MOOCs or short learning programs. They can turn those engaged scholarship outputs and those engaged research outputs and mobilize it for public purpose. They can also frame and create desired development outcomes. As engaged scholars, we link our scholarship to the goal of public benefit, and we link it to the development challenges and problems of our world. We apply our intellectual skills to those development challenges. And so with collaboration with our community partners, we can actually create desired development outcomes and development plans and projects that will take us from the scholarly output to the projects that will actually be implemented and measured for impact. Our engaged scholars do not ever bypass the skill of being a good listener. They are always listening carefully. They are listening and allowing others to be heard and allowing respectful listening. They do not go about saying, I am the one with the PhD, or I'm the professor, I'm the head of the university, so listen to me. They are listening authentically, because in authentic listening, there you can have the seeds for building strong and constructive partnerships. Our engaged scholars are also aware about being and reality. They are aware about how personal socioeconomic context, language usage, ideological inclination may influence reflection on society and impinge on scholarship. We're a very divided nation, and each of us express our being through our scholarship. And sometimes we bypass the biases that we have, and we fail to understand that our being and the way we see ourselves and our consciousness about our world and the realities may actually cause us to have a very biased type of scholarship, which is seen through the eyes of our being. Engaged scholars are the ones that understand that a lot of scholars would fall into the middle class category, and sometimes those middle class sensibilities are deeply woven in our discourse. And so we have to become more aware of being and reality and how we are being perceived as well. Our engaged scholars are also not frantically out there looking for a buck at every turn, looking for and on the take at every turn. Our engaged scholars understand that there are higher values. Our engaged scholars resist the push to engage for the purpose of consumerist or empire perspective. The motivation for engaged scholarship is very, very sacred, and it is for the merit and the benefit of life. And that is the underlying motivation which drives our engaged scholars. Our engaged scholars are also very much aware of the ethical dimensions. We use the word ethics, which is coming from the Greek, but when we look at the word ethics in various African languages, the word is very closely linked to the word character. So it is about character formation. It is about developing the right character within the right circumstances, in the right contexts, and thinking about what is right and what is just in a certain situation. Our engaged scholars are very attuned to the power dynamics. Remember, when we go about with our university branding, when we represent our universities, we come with the power of that university, with the power of the higher education sector. And so these power dynamics may have impacts on our relationships with our stakeholders and our communities. And so our engaged scholars are aware of overt power and covert power. They are aware of agenda setting and power dynamics in agenda setting. They are aware that we need to make sure that there are effective relations that are not run by power dynamics, where we are just pushing our way through communities and determining what must be done when, with who and how, and so on. So power dynamics are what we think about, and we make sure that we are not creating power and partnership disequilibriums. Our engaged scholars also address hegemonies in intellectual and development spaces. Why is it that it is said that about no other continent is there so much written about it by outsiders than insiders? Why is it that the rest of the world need to write about us, need to tell us how we must implement development plans, what would be the proper development strategies that we adopt? We are living in this context. We are living and breathing in this environment. We are the scholars of the African continent. And so the people and the places and the memories and the causes of Africa, we are highly intentional about. And so we want to make sure that we dispel this hegemony in intellectual and development spaces. We must no longer be seen as academics or scholars and universities on the back foot, trying to catch up to the northern hegemonies in scholarship and development. We need to assert ourselves by becoming confident in this area and dispelling the myth that Africa has to be under the constant tutelage of others. And so our engaged scholars uphold the principles of cognitive justice. We know that we've been dealing with an assault on the African Academy from colonial days, and that assault has not ended. We are still battling the impact of coloniality on our thinking and its very tragic impact on the way we look at our world, and the fact that it continues to bear resemblance to the colonial masters long after they have left our nations. Coloniality makes sure that there is mind control through economic systems, through scholarly systems, through how we publish, through a whole range of spaces. And we need to become aware of that. And we need to make sure, as Foucault says, that there is an insurrection of subjugated knowledge, that no longer will we have knowledge pushed to the periphery and pushed to the margins and silenced. So where are those spaces where the knowledge has been pushed to the periphery and been silenced? We bring those spaces in. We take the time to understand that and know about that. And so, friends, our engaged scholars actually have discovered the merit of thinking in community. Now, thinking in community is not group thinking, mass thinking. It is being able to break those silo walls, break the insulation and isolation of the academic life, and widen those circles of engagement so that it is no longer us curriculating just with each other across the table or engaging with research and quoting each other and tapping each other on the back. It is us widening those circles to involve government, business, civil society, and communities across physical settlement types. Fanon said that intellectuals need to put themselves in the school of the people to rediscover the ethic of thinking in community. And that's what our engaged scholars do. They discover the ethic of thinking in community. They widen the circle, as in the words of that great song, Make the Circle Bigger. We have a range of dialogue partners around the circle that will enable us to curriculate, to determine development challenges, to determine the agenda for engaged research, to have engaged theory making and engaged curriculation. Remember, engaged scholars understand praxis. They know clearly that there's no separate dividing walls. Now we're doing theory. Now we're doing practical work. No, engaged scholars understand that praxis is not just another word for practice and action. Instead, praxis is the unity of theory and practice. It's the constant interplay between ideas and actions and reflection and actions. And this happens in synergy. One definition of praxis that I like is the thoughtful reflection and action that occurs in synchrony, the same time, in the direction of transforming the world. It happens together, not these separates. So, one of the great benefits of being an engaged scholar is that we are proactive as engaged scholars. Knowledge production for us is not reactionist. Suddenly a new problem comes on the horizon and we all scrambling to include it in our curricula or to generate research on it. Instead, engaged scholars, these are the ones that are able to move beyond the reactive scholarly paradigms to the proactive scholarly paradigms. When we engage, we have our fingers on the pulse. Our hearts beat with what is going on, and we are able to detect game changers, disruptors, and all sorts of emerging challenges, and we can write about it and create curricula on it long before it even happens. And so, as I said earlier, engaged scholars are proactive because they are also futures thinkers. They are scanning the horizon for what is probable, what is possible, what is preferable. And they are not just letting the world happen to them, but they're actively creating the world that they want to live in dialogue with their communities. So, engaged teaching, we know, is course and curriculum related teaching and learning activities that involve communities in a mutually beneficial manner. We can create curricula in dialogue with our collaborators, partners, and stakeholders. That way, our curricula will be highly responsive, not only for our current needs, but for the needs yet to come. It is often being said that we are actually, we have curricula that's out there that in a couple of years' time will just have no point because the dynamics of the world are changing at such a rapid rate. And we are creating graduates who will be unfit for the world that they will graduate in. And so the engaged teaching will enable us to have engaged curriculation, engaged theory making, and we will even in our very teaching be engaging and bringing in stakeholder voices, case studies, and key insight from the world outside the university. Engaged research must have an intentional public purpose. Remember that the widely quoted Boyer said that. And we need to understand that engaged research are governed and characterized by principles that guide research. So it's not a break from the principles that guide research. But what is very special about engaged research is the relationships that are formed in the process in terms of setting the research agenda, writing the research, mobilizing the research, and assessing the research for its impact. So if we look at this continuum, we are seeing that on one side, we have less community involvement in research. This on the other, this far left of the continuum, we see investigator-driven research. Here, the academic in isolation drives the research. And then as we move next, we see research taking place in community settings. So this is community-based research. As we move further on, we see community-based research. So, sorry, the first one was community-placed and the second was community-based. This now we are seeing communities becoming involved in the agenda setting, the problem identification, the structure, the processes, even the research methodologies. Moving further up the continuum, we see community-based participatory research with the community's equal participation. And at the far end of the continuum, we see where we have engaged communities who are actually involved in citizen science and they are driving research by themselves. And we are seeing this emerge in our context. Now, in measuring engaged research, we are asking, does this research improve life? How democratic and collaborative was the process? What was the level of collaboration and dialogue that took place, and was it sufficient? What publication and communication vehicles were we using and mobilization vehicles were we using to take that engaged research from that output to a mobilization tool that can be used to ensure transformation? And then, do the results lead to concrete action? So there is monitoring and evaluation involved in the process of our engaged scholarship projects. And then, is the publications being accessible by the public? Very often we write about the public, but then the very public we write about know nothing about what we wrote about and what our findings were. And so we will come back to that issue in the ethical aspect of our presentation. Now, we have spoken a lot about the engaged university, the engaged scholar, and our thinking around all of these areas. For me, the engaged university also needs structural and systemic processes to ensure that it's not just paying lip service to engaged scholarship. And to do that, we need a compelling strategy, mission, and vision, which serves as a high-level indication. We must not just use the words engaged scholarship and just show that it's there, but it needs to be well-developed, which will serve as a high-level indication that the university understands its place as an engaged university and understands its mission and practice in this area. The engaged university also needs terminological clarification. The terms of community engagement, engaged scholarship, social impact, we have so many terms. What do those terms mean for our universities in our context? What are the definitions? And this terminological clarity and the definitions, it would be great to even provide them across all South African languages so that we are all buying into this definition and we have delimited what engaged scholarship is within the boundaries of our university and in our nation. Now, we also need a very effective governance structure and the correct location of the engaged scholarship or community engagement office. This office must not be left alone in terms of just abandoned. It needs to be supported from very high levels. It needs to be seen as a cohering office that the faculties and the university management work with and around. And this is the office that moves engaged scholarship efforts forward, both in the thinking, in the strategy, in the project ideation, in the evaluation, in the reporting, and so on. This office also works with the university to develop the policy for engaged scholarship and ensures that all other policies are in coherence with this policy and vice versa. We cannot have a policy which cannot be seen in context within the wider policy framework of the university. This office is also responsible for creating procedure. How do we operationalize engaged scholarship? I mean, we can talk about the ideology of it, we can talk about the theory of it, but then getting it from an ideological, missional statement and a theoretical statement into operations is a whole other game. The operations of engaged scholarship require procedure. How do we turn the development ideas we have into project plans? What is the content of those project plans? What are the key niche areas that as a university we are focusing on? How do we make sure that our project teams are well trained in project management, risk management, quality management, stakeholder management, and all those wider areas? So procedure is necessary in that regard. In UNISA, we have 20 procedures that we've created to enable our project teams to effectively operationalize their projects. Then we also need a committed budget, not just a pittance, not just a small little, purse that is just given to the Engaged Scholarship or Community Engagement Office. If we are going to speak with our mouths that we are engaged university, if we are going to declare that we want to be a leader in engaged scholarship, then we must make sure that our money, put our money where our mouths are. And so we need to ensure that we have a committed budget that will enable engaged teaching and learning and engaged research, as well as knowledge mobilization for impact. And this committed budget cannot be do whatever you want with it. Projects need to have spend rules so that we are cutting out bad costs that are, just costs that run wild in travel, costs that run wild in catering, costs that run wild in all these university logoed jackets and all of these other things, but costs that will drive the projects forward, good costs that push the deliverables forward and achieve the targets and goals that we need. We also need in every faculty engaged scholarship committees that will cohere the faculty's effort in that specific faculty. It will encourage multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity. It will, in a transparent space, talk about projects and the funding allocated to the projects. It will also be a space where knowledge sharing takes place. It will also be a space where the faculty's niche areas are being discussed. And so we would also need a capacity building program, a rigorous program that happens all through the year, focusing on enhancing engaged scholarship theory, ideation, and praxis. And that capacity building program does not only have to focus on the scholarly, that will be a large compartment of it. It will involve engaged thinking, engaged scholarship, engaged teaching and learning, engaged research, engaged curriculation, engaged theory making, the whole range of it. But it can also involve the technologies of engagement. Now with COVID, most of our on-site activity had to move online. But in rural contexts, we also experiencing the digital divides, the fact that we as a country have not been able to provide ICTs that are required to all our people. And so we have these huge disequilibriums, and we can also have capacity building on the use of e-learning and ICTs, but also how do we mobilize knowledge to communities with limited access to ICTs and e-learning technologies. And so there's a great space for creativity in knowledge mobilization to such communities in order for us to address the digital divide. We will also need project registration, project funding, project monitoring and evaluation, and project reporting cycles. So there will be seasons set for when projects register, for when projects are funded, for when projects are monitored and evaluated, for when projects report. And those reports must enhance the annual report of the university and the university's integrated report. In fact, it would be great to provide an Engaged Scholarship annual report on all the project's activities, its impact on engaged